the trio arrived at Mew's crash site. Of course, they all wore pressure suits, even the one who was wrongly assumed to have come from a land of beasts. In reality, both number 2 and the young master would like to watch Yi Chang embark in space without his pressure suit. Firstly, they were curious, and secondly, if he died from a stroke it would undoubtedly be good news for both her and the young master. Unfortunately, Yi Chang ignored number 2's instigation and put on the pressure suit dutifully. Yi Chang wanted to avoid the limelight, and acting like an average person would keep the attention away from him, which in turn would help him survive longer. This was a principle he abided. Number 2 was dejected. The man before him lacked the usual impulse and haste of a teenager. Instead, he was seasoned and steady in his actions. This bothered her the most and kept her on edge. Since pressure suits were necessary, Yi Chang had untied both his captives. Without a doubt, he warned them against doing anything foolish before that. Although the walkway was in vacuum, the gravity matrix was back online. Hence, they could move around without floating haphazardly like before, and can even walk like normal. The walkway lights were all switched on, and one could see everything clearly under the bright illumination. When number 2 and the young master saw Mew, they both responded very differently. Under the lighting, Yi Chang could finally identify every detail of his surroundings. Mew evidently crashed in the middle of the walkway. Its high velocity came with a great amount of energy, and the starship's thick armor could not stop Mew from entering. The impact forced open a large hole, and Mew, fresh from the impact with vessel's armor was depleted, sprawled between the entrance of the vessel and the outside of it. Mew looked like an onion planted in the soil that was the vessel. Number 2 was furious, and her eyes gleamed with rage. This was the real culprit. She thought of the destruction that ensued, killing everyone but her and the young master. The vessel was severely damaged in multiple areas and could no longer operate normally. All they could do now was to wait for rescue from other passing starships, but in the vast outer space, it would not be easy to locate another starship. It was almost hopeless. If they were to encounter space pirates, they would be unable to escape the fate of slavery. With her looks, she could be in for something worse. She grieved the deaths of her comrades, but not to the point where she would hate Yi Chang. The most important thing now was the young master's safety. The young master's safety was her top priority. Due to her harsh training at an early age, she was apathetic towards the worldly ways. How could she not be furious when the man standing before her was a threat to the young master? Yi Chang was not oblivious to number 2's rage, but he did not feel guilt. Whether the true culprit was himself or not, he did not think it to be a good reason. The way he saw it, everyone should be responsible for themselves. If you could not protect yourself from harm, then you were to blame. Similar to the relationship between a predator and a prey, surely you cannot hope for the predator to be charitable. The young master was very excited to see the strange mech and had forgotten all about Yi Chang. Heavens! It's beautiful. Ingenious. The one who created it must be a genius. The young master scrambled towards the mech, his pale complexion turning a few shades redder from the excitement. He murmured incessantly to himself like some mad person. Yi Chang ignored the madness, his heart constantly calling for Mew, but Mew did not move, as if he was asleep. He could not help but felt disheartened. After spending more than a year together, he and Mew had developed a deep bond. Under Mew's guidance, he had grown much stronger than his earlier self. The upcoming stellar flare was no threat to Mew, and while Mew did not speak of it, Yi Chang knew that Mew ventured on this extremely risky mission for his sake. Mew was broken because of him. Yi Chang stared blankly at Mew's hull that once emanated the most unique radiance now reflected a darker shade of obscurity. The one mech which Yi Chang thought to be the strongest of all was now covered in bruises. Yi Chang felt woeful and anguished. He took down the ornament that had always hung around his neck. Yi Chang did not use it again after the first time he cut his finger with it, since Mew did not like staying in the alternate dimension, and he also preferred to have Mew for company. Who would have thought that the first time he used it to keep Mew would be under such circumstances? Number 2 stood behind Yi Chang, her expression unreadable. Yi Chang seemed to be distracted with his guard lowered. If she took this opportunity to sneak an attack, she might be able to kill him in one blow. However, should she fail, she and the young master would have to face the man's most violent retaliation. Just the thought of Yi Chang's monstrous attacks made her shudder. To attack. Or not to attack. Number 2 contemplated. Yi Chang's ghostly speed and strong body made her heart squeeze in trepidation, and she felt all the more self-conscious. Yi Chang did not notice number 2's odd look. He sighed inwardly and transported Mew into the alternate dimension. The young master was climbing onto Mew with gleaming eyes, and his hands repeatedly caressing Mew's body like a lover, occasionally gasping in awe. As Yi Chang transported Mew, the young master did not expect the mech under him to disappear. He felt a sudden emptiness below him and exclaimed in surprise. His shrieking interrupted number 2 out of her indecision, and when she saw the young master falling from midair, she was horrified. With a twist of her body and a powerful sprint, she dashed towards the young master. However, there was someone faster than her. Number 2 saw a shadow pass by her, and the young master was caught mid-waist by Yi Chong. The young master was dangling in the air, waving his hands frantically. Yi Chong looked to number 2 and tossed the young master to the loyal attendant. Number 2 rushed to grab hold of him, and gave Yi Chong a look of gratification as she consoled the terrified young master tenderly. Yi Chong walked away without looking back. "All right, we head for the control room now." Number 2 dared not hesitate under his unassailable tone, for she did not want to offend the enigmatic man before her. At the very least, the feeling of being all tied up with rope was extremely unpleasant. Number 2 held the young master firmly and followed slowly behind Yi Chong. The young master, who was still in her arms, had not recovered from the shock, and looked as white as a ghost. Who was this man? Even an amateur like number 2 can tell that the mech that Yi Chong kept was special, and one who possessed a mech like that was definitely not a commoner. For someone with a well-built physique, incredible speed and a mech like no other, who could he actually be? Number 2 questioned in her head, and continued to trail behind Yi Chong. The bridge was a mess. The floor was scattered with random broken parts and fragments, which made one to realize the intensity of Mu's impact. Once she understood that Yi Chong was uninterested in being a threat to the young master's life, number 2 became cooperative. They were now all in this together, and if they did not help each other, the odds of survival were slim. In the face of Yi Chong's overwhelming strength, number 2 could only keep a low profile. Ever since seeing Mu, the young master seemed to be in a daze and constantly murmured under his breath. Number 2 knew it was a helpless situation. The young master was a nice person, not one to put on airs and always affectionate, but once he gets involved in something related to his research, he changed mood quickly. The young master was indifferent to matters of the family, but was invested in mech research, and had shown remarkable talent in the area. His dream was to become a mech engineer, but the first young mistress strongly disapproved. As the legal heir of the family, he did not get involved in general affairs but only focused on his research. All this time, family matters were dealt by the first young mistress with great difficulty. Even this trip was hidden from the first young mistress by the young master. It was to get away from the life that he had grown weary of, but who would have thought that they would meet such an incident, and get to know a formidable master? Number 2 was in deep regret. If she knew this would happen, she would have stopped the young master from running away from home. Number 2 realized that her thoughts were irrelevant to the current situation and would affect her morale, so she struggled to banish these thoughts. Yi Chong was completely clueless about starships and needed an expert's advice. "What do we do now?" Yi Chong asked. Number 2 made a few adjustments to the controls and turned back to Yi Chong. "Our current condition is very critical, and the starship's propulsion systems are completely shut down. Plus, the hull took heavy damage with an aftermath of multiple cracks. Most importantly, the pulse signal transmitter is broken, and we cannot send a distress signal to request for rescue from other starships. Our current distance from the SS Zuoyu is about 118,000 kilometers, about 8 days away by usual travel, but regrettably the emergency escape pods of this starship are damaged. If not, we could have taken the escape pods and head straight for SS Zuoyu. Also, to our great misfortune." Number 2 paused in amazement that both were listening attentively, and continued slowly. "The SS Zuoyu's patrol would only search a 5-day traveling radius from the space station. That is to say, our only hope now is that a passing starship would find us." Number 2 described the situation in a calm and organized manner. This made Yi Chong do a double take on the exceedingly lousy woman. She was not all that bad. The young master was also alert once again, and began to inspect the bridge. As expected of a genius, it took him no time to begin restoration. His hands moved fluently like a magician while the parts and accessories danced to the unique melody of his tune. Number 2 watched dreamily by the side as he worked. Yi Chong could not help but be a little surprised at the young man. He did not expect that a fragile-looking fellow like him would be talented in mechanics. Yi Chong himself had some expertise in the field, but compared to the young man, Yi Chong thought himself to be far more inferior. It seemed that there is always someone better out there. Those elders were right, Yi Chong thought. In reality, Yi Chong had only studied in Aurora for slightly more than a year, but the young master had begun his studies since young, with materials that were impossible to obtain on the desolate trash planets. It was inevitable that he was better than Yi Chong, and there was also the fact that the young master's family was deeply involved with mechs. Yi Chong observed the young man's reconstruction, verifying much of what he had learned, and got much out of the process. Yi Chong began to treat the duo more courteously without realizing it. Regrettably, the starship's damages were too serious. The propulsion system was hopeless, and the air revitalization and thermal systems could not be fully restored, but the trio could at least rejoice at the availability of necessities for survival. The vessel's food and water supply were sufficient, and now the only thing they could do was wait. They began chatting, but both sides were tactful enough to avoid asking about the other's background. The young master's name was Gu Shaz, but his attendant's name was even weirder. She was called Number 2. But Yi Chong was not very interested in trivial matters. He politely gave a brief introduction of himself. Conversation with Gu Shaz was undeniably pleasant. They shared the same interests, and grew more excited as they spoke. Number 2 watched them both with a smile, but her gaze was mostly on Gu Shaz. By now, Yi Chong was thoroughly impressed by Gu Shaz. The young man's knowledge was far too advanced for his age, and Yi Chong believed that he must not be far behind the elders at Aurora, and could even be the forefront expert in certain areas. On the other hand, Gu Shaz was also looking at Yi Chong in a new light. He had thought the man before him to be a roughneck, but now it seemed that he was very knowledgeable in the mechanics of mechs. The man had original insights on matters, and could often identify the heart of the issue as well as boasted a solid theoretical foundation. Compared to him, Yi Chong must fare quite well. If only he knew that Yi Chong's practical experience was near zero, what would he have thought then? The pair spoke with increasing enthusiasm, and began to feel a sense of appreciation for each other. Gu Shaz might behave humbly on a regular basis, but he still had a hint of arrogance in him. It was rare for him to approve of someone, and now that he had, how could he not be fond of him? As for Yi Chong, this was his first time interacting with someone around the same age as him, whose true strength Yi Chong respected. It was understandable that Yi Chong established a good impression of him. Number 2 sat at the side, smiling lightly as the duo's conversation heated up. Who would have thought that, about an hour ago, both sides were like sworn enemies? A commercial fleet formed by over 30 transport spaceships was flying steadily in space. The chief, Jing Mo, sat on the commander's seat and bridge, deep in thought. He was about 8 to 9 days out from reaching the SS Zuoyu. If everything went smoothly, the payment this time would be lucrative, with an additional of official medals of recognition for his services. He might be able to elevate his commercial qualification a level higher, and then he would be able to trade in mechs. Nowadays, businesses with qualifications to trade in mechs were few and far in between. What he could earn from mechs would be multiple times more than from his current goods. The goods he was shipping this time from Tianluo Galaxy to Fall Galaxy had took 5 whole months, and they had encountered a few crews of space pirates along the way. Fortunately, the squad of mech pilots he hired was capable, and they managed to escape unscathed. He thought of how he had hired this infamous squad of mech pilots despite the high costs. If not for his wisdom, they would have lost the goods for sure and even their lives. 10 days left. Let there not be any mishaps in these 10 days. Jing Mo shut his eyes and prayed inwardly. Out of the blue, a blaring alarm disrupted his prayers. Mo Jing opened his eyes, and his chest tightened. The trio had waited for 5 days. Unlike planets inhabited by humans, space was quiet, and the deafening silence tested one's strength of will to the limit. Many were unwilling to go sightseeing in space as they were unable to bear with the silence. Experiencing extended periods of complete silence could make one vulnerable to mental breakdowns. The vastness of the universe further increased the psychological pressure of quietness on people. Hence, while it was now technically possible for solo space travel, none had tried. This issue was not something particularly troublesome for Yi Chong. On the trash planet, he had lived alone for years, and solitude had become second in nature. Instead, if he was subjected to a crowded environment, he would feel uncomfortable. In the depths of his heart, Yi Chong had mixed feelings about his future life: curiosity, fear, anxiety, yearning. However, the silence was a trial for Gu Shaz and Number 2. Yi Chong shut his eyes to rest, and while he was not fully conscious, he was still vigilant. Since Yi Chong seemed to be asleep, Gu Shaz chatted with Number 2 instead, as if the words would overcome the horrifying silence. An odd ring began resonating. Yi Chong immediately opened his eyes and stood upright. Gu Shaz and Number 2 stopped their conversation and looked towards the bridge. The display screen showed a huge fleet of starships. Gu Shaz and Number 2 could not help but gasp in surprise, but quickly became overjoyed. Gu Shaz even hugged Number 2 out of excitement. It was a pity that he did not know much about starships, and therefore could not make much out of them. However, from the mechs flying out of the port and starboard of the starships, it seemed that the other side had seen them. Gu Shaz let go of Number 2 and smiled at Yi Chong. That alarm sounds terrible. I shouldn't have used it. The laser radar was heavily compromised, and remarkably, the damage was in its interior parts. However, Gu Shaz's exceptional capabilities meant that the radar was still rudimentarily restored. The alarm unit was broken, so Gu Shaz had to replace it with a speaker from somewhere else, but the sound was truly horrible, and that was why Gu Shaz had complained thus. Perfectionism was his nature. Number 2 raced to the bridge and activated the laser lights, rapidly firing flashes that communicated a distress signal. Upon seeing the distress signal, the other party's mech pilots picked up their speed, but in spite of that, their battle formation was still intact, indicating the great extent of their training. Yi Chong asked coolly, "Are we armed?" This was Yi Chong's habit. No matter the circumstances, he hoped that he would be in control of the situation instead of passively going with the flow. Gu Shaz and Number 2 were stunned. "Best if we have mechs," he added. Number 2 shook her head. No white mechs, and the mechs owned by victims of the crash were tailored specifically by their respective families. Only by sending the mechs back to the families and performing a special ID recalibration could they be used again. White mechs were mechs that were not locked to specific pilots. Yi Chong could not hold back his disappointment. Gu Shaz suddenly remembered something and ran to a corner to search for something. After a moment of ransacking, he returned, eager like a child. "This was a dagger that I made for fun. Usually I use it as a tool." He then passed his invention to Yi Chong, already regarding him as a friend. Yi Chong accepted the dagger. It was black all over, and the laser-processed edge was very sharp. The anti-slip treatment made it easy to handle, and its resilience was impressive. Yi Chong nodded. "This dagger is quite resilient, but the stiffness is horrible." As he finished, he held the tip of the dagger with one hand and the handle with the other and bent the dagger easily to an arc. He then released the dagger's tip, and with a swish, the dagger recovered its former shape, undamaged by the strain. Gu Shaz gaped, and upon hearing Yi Chong's comment that the stiffness was horrible, replied reflexively, "You're quite strong. That dagger was just something I made during my spare time. I didn't really think it through." Number 2 was not surprised by the demonstration, since she had personally experienced Yi Chong's strength. He was truly a dreadful monster, not like a human at all. Number 2 made to put on a miniature mech, but Gu Shaz stopped her. "Your mech is too garish. It's alright if we're at home, but out here it's really not appropriate. Besides, wearing that mech is like putting on an exoskeleton. How uncomfortable." You're so beautiful. It's a pity if you're stuck in that shell." Number 2 lowered her head bashfully, feeling butterflies in her stomach. Jing Mo looked at the trio before him, a young master, a female attendant, and a guard. Jing Mo focused mostly on Gu Shaz. Gu Shaz had the charisma of an aristocrat, and was very modest and well-spoken, all signs of an outstanding upbringing. However, he was without the typical aristocrat's conceit, indicating that he most likely came from a family with a long historical standing. Only those from affluent long-standing families would behave thus, unlike the overnight nouveau riche with unbridled arrogance. However, the status of an aristocrat was not self-designated, but acknowledged by the public. Aristocratic families today were scarce, perhaps even countable with the fingers on one hand. If one could develop a good relationship with an aristocratic family, it would mean welcoming an endless flow of money and a bright future. Jing Mo's eyes twinkled at the thought. Jing Mo spoke to Gu Shaz warmly, and even though they had no common interests, he still responded respectfully. The alluring features of Number 2 had the whole starship's crew eyeing her discreetly, occasionally murmuring something under their breaths. Eventually, some even deliberately went to the bridge to peek at her. Number 2, who had never experienced anything like this, was distressed. Amongst the three, Yi Chong was now the most insignificant individual. His looks were average, and lacked Gu Shaz's demeanor or Number 2's unrivaled beauty. When Gu Shaz introduced him as a guard, Jing Mo had even scrutinized him suspiciously, for how can someone scrawny like him be a guard? Yi Chong was far from scrawny, balance would be a more appropriate adjective. However, compared to the other guards with their muscular build and alarmingly thick-set limbs, it was no wonder that Jing Mo would think of him as scrawny. Only the leader of the mech pilot squad eyed him a few times, looking as if deep in thought. Without a doubt, Jing Mo was a master in engineering the atmosphere. Upon seeing Number 2's predicament, he roared at his employees and ordered them away. He then continued chatting with Gu Shaz in an engaging manner, for he knew what young people were interested in, and boasted about his adventures during his youth in an outrageous manner. The three newcomers were deeply engrossed in his stories about the various customs and practices from all over the universe, and could not help but be captivated by his narratives, including Yi Chong. Inside the bridge, laughter filled the air, and the atmosphere was lively. No one could have guessed of the dangers that awaited them ahead. Jing Mo sipped a mouthful of sweet grass juice and asked Fid, "What do you make of these people?" Fid was the squad leader of Jing Mo's hired mech squad. He was exceptionally tall, with an expression as solemn as a marble effigy, and coarse short hair that jut up straight like steel wires. A 2 to 3 centimeters long scar ran at an angle across his brow, giving not an impression of savagery, but of great valor. In addition, his strong build gave a sense of safety, and in the Tianluo galaxy, many local maidens were attracted to him. But these traits were not why Jing Mo valued him. Fit had good insights on matters with a steady and cautious personality. He was a good leader and an honorable man. For these reasons, Jing Mo trusted him. If not for Fid's reluctance, Jing Mo would not have wanted the man to work as his employee. Fid was a competent person who could stand on his own. It was thanks to his cautious nature and leadership that their current trip went on without a hitch so far. Fid sat like a soldier, with his back straight and eyes focused. Once he settled, he could sit without moving for hours, and that impressed Jing Mo. Fid paused to think for a moment, and replied in a clear manner. The young man is probably the young master of some influential family. The three seem to be genuine. And his guard seemed to be quite capable, though I am not entirely certain. According to them, their starship was heavily damaged due to impact with a meteorite, but based on my inspection of the impact point on their starship, the hull was obviously reinforced for strength. If a meteorite crashed into it, I did not find any trace of rock debris around, and that is impossible. Jing Mo was alarmed. Could it be that they're acting? Are they spies sent by space pirates? Fid continued, spies of the pirates. I think it's not very probable. There were many bodies on the starship, and those victims mostly have mechs. Fid's expression turned unreadable, and their mechs are quite peculiar. Peculiar? Jing Mo asked curiously. Mechs that could even strike the mech squad leader as peculiar, how could one not be curious about them? Fid paused and replied, yes, very peculiar. Their mechs were undoubtedly expert-level mechs. You can imagine, if more than 50 people were armed with expert-level mechs, they must be quite formidable. Besides, from the condition of the corpses, their muscle structure showed that they were highly trained. They should all be expert-level mech pilots. More than 50 expert-level mechs. And more than 50 expert-level pilots. Jing Mo gasped. Expert-level pilots meant great capabilities. No matter where they were, expert-level mechs were highly sought after by those who seek power. Even Fid's squad, a fine reputation, the Oak Leaves, consisted of only 10 expert-level mech pilots, including Fid himself. Hence, one can imagine Jing Mo's profound shock when he found out that the starship had more than 50 expert-level pilots, each equipped with an expert-level mech. Fid nodded somberly. Yes, that's right, I checked them myself. As we all know, when a mech's owner dies, the mech would reset itself to become a white mech. What made these mechs peculiar was that even though their owners had all perished, not only do they not reset, but they automatically engaged into a self-protection mode. No one could use or extract information from the mechs. Mechs that could protect themselves. Mo Jing was bewildered. As far as I know, this technology is only used by a few aristocrats and the military. Fid explained all that he knew of the matter. Aristocrats are fine, since he might be able to benefit from them, but if it's the military, Jing Mo scratched his head unconsciously, deep in thought. This could get out of hand. Jing Mo would rather die than to have any dealings with the cold-blooded military. Additionally, Fid looked at Jing Mo's ghastly expression, and felt unable to continue. Jing Mo believed that he was going crazy. Good heavens. He had thought that a golden opportunity had fell into his lap, but now it seemed to be a huge problem. Jing Mo panted heavily, he was not sure if his heart could endure the rest of Fid's report. After taking a few deep breaths, Jing Mo calmed down, and a moment later, his complexion recovered a little. He signaled for Fid to go on. Fid gave him a quick look and continued, additionally, this starship has no labels, no manufacturing date, and no place of manufacture. However, it is indeed remarkably advanced. More accurately speaking, it is more advanced than all the starships available in the market for civil use. More advanced than all the available civilian starships. What do you mean? Jing Mo was baffled, and moments later, his face paled again. Could it be a military warship? It can't be. Aren't military starships banned for production quite some time ago? Even the military cannot produce them. Haven't the 5 main galaxies banned all manufacture and research of starships for military use? Are these people insane? Do they not fear death? 3 centuries ago, the government for all 5 main galaxies made a joint declaration, forbidding all individuals and organizations including the military from owning and developing battleships of any kind. Transgressors would be severely punished. From then on, mech pilots became the main source of manpower for combat. Fid went silent for a moment before continuing slowly, you are right, to a certain extent. However, pain and struggle showed briefly in his eyes, but the agitated Jing Mo did not notice. Seeing that Jing Mo was on the verge of a breakdown, Fid felt it necessary to offer some solace. Don't worry, while it is very advanced, it was not armed with any firepower, and so it is not really a warship. Jing Mo exhaled in relief. Oh, you gave me a fright on purpose, didn't you? Don't make a joke out of something like that again. I wasn't sure if my weak heart was about to explode or not. Fid smiled wryly. While the starship was not armed with weapons, it still defied the rules set by the government. Fid became serious and spoke lowly. There's also the most important point. Jing Mo nearly slumped in defeat and cried, "Oh heavens, do you want me to die?" Fid ignored him and spoke his mind without hesitation. From the hull's damage, they had indeed suffered an impact. It killed 50 expert-level pilots all at once, so one can only imagine the power of the impact. As for how the three had survived, I have no intention of investigating further. However, I had found no debris whatsoever besides the hull's fragments near the crash site. I would like to know what really happened to them. Was it man-made, or due to a mysterious natural phenomenon? If it was man-made, would the culprits make their move on the three survivors once they found out about them? If yes, I would definitely not believe that they would have a charitable heart and leave our crew out of the mess. Besides, I do not believe that our starship's hull could withstand even half of that force that hit their starship. If it was a natural phenomenon, would it happen again? This is what I'm most interested in. Jing Mo was completely speechless and his face ashen. If only he had not rescued those three. Jing Mo felt a wave of regret washed over him. The fleet flew silently and steadily onwards, but after leaving this unending darkness, what could possibly await them? Jing Mo and Fid dared not consider the horrors. Big brother, do you think they got it wrong? A pugnacious-looking heavy-set man asked in a low, muffled voice. Who knows? The one-eyed leader sat with a leg hanging over the armrest and his eyes closed, taking a pleasant puff of his cigar. He was intoxicated with a product of good quality, naturally grown and processed by well-known experts, not something bought from a regular store with a few hundred yuan. Big boss, I'm afraid things have changed. A gaunt man spoke up beside One Eye, his eyes constantly casting furtive glances here and there. This man was obviously the general of the group. What do you mean? One Eye was still lazily resting in a semi-lying posture. The gaunt general spoke lowly. Big boss, think about it. It's been 6 days since there has been any news from our spy from within. This does not bode well. Besides, we've been waiting here for quite a few days, and usually they would have arrived by now. One Eye nodded approvingly. You're right. Then what do you think should be done? Surely we cannot return the deposit. He looked displeased. The gaunt general smiled slyly. Don't worry about it, big boss. That fellow would not dare to leak this information. He is more afraid of us than blowing his cover. Once the news is out, we would only suffer from a little reputational blemish, but that fellow, he would be utterly disgraced. Since we've already taken the money, there's no way we're giving them back. One Eye laughed heartily and patted his general on the shoulder. Right, you're really the clever one. Then there's nothing left for us here now, right? The heavy-set man panicked. Big boss, returning with nothing to show is not favorable. The other brothers would surely complain. One Eye stroked his chin, deep in thought. You're right. Returning empty-handed will tarnish our morale. Just then, a servant came running while panting and spoke agitatedly. Big boss, there's a fat lamb right ahead, and a very big one at that. One Eye tilted his head back and laughed at the sky. It seems that our luck has arrived, whether we want it or not. Tell the brothers to get ready. Yi Chong and the pair sat in a room. Gu Shez peeked at the door and spoke in distress. What now? They wouldn't detain us, would they? Why have someone guarding outside? Are we prisoners now? Number 2 was pained by the young master's despair and consoled him. Young master, do not worry, they're only doing this because they're suspicious of our identities. Without any confirmation, they would not dare to do anything to us. Yi Chong could not be bothered to entertain them. He shut his eyes and rested, preserving his strength. In this unfamiliar territory, Yi Chong did not let his guard down. His body was in a very peculiar state, ready to launch a fatal strike at the enemy at any time. As for the 2 guards outside watching the door, Yi Chong was not perturbed by them. He did not think those 2 were a threat nor have the capabilities to restrain him. Yi Chong had always felt odd, for the people he met seemed to be quite fragile physically. It was strange that such a weak body would surely not withstand even a slightly powerful hit. Did they not know that the body was the essence of everything? It's really confounding. Gu Shez observed Yi Chong. While he admired Yi Chong's calmness, he was curious as to what the man was up to before getting into this mess. The 2 guards outside were expert-level pilots. The squad leader's repeated warnings were still fresh in their heads, and they had always trusted him. Hence, while they felt that having 2 expert-level mech pilots to guard 3 nobodies was a little excessive, they still obeyed the order unquestionably. Unexpectedly, a few orders came through the comms device in their ear, and their expressions immediately changed. Both exchanged a look of surprise. One of them opened the door and spoke to the 3 solemnly, "Everyone, please do not leave this room, else your safety is not guaranteed." Number 2 asked worriedly, "My 2 good sirs, what happened?" The other guard hesitated a moment before speaking, "We are under attack from space pirates. It seems like the Crimson Hawk." Crimson Hawk. Gu Shaz and Number 2 gasped in unison, their faces paled in an instant. Their responses were expected by the 2 pilots, and one of them spoke, "We're going into battle now. Please, do not worry. We'll put our best into this." The last phrase was spoken with great determination, as if the only alternative of success was death, and this commanded respect. "We're off now. You all take care." The pair went outside in a hurry, leaving the 3 behind in the room. Crimson Hawk. How is this possible? Number 2 murmured in a daze, her face the image of despair. Gu Shaz was also deeply troubled, and upset at the situation they were in. Only Yi Chong looked the same as before, fully composed. "What's the Crimson Hawk?" Seeing the 2 in fear and trepidation, Yi Chong was curious as to the cause. The pair looked at Yi Chong like he was an idiot. "Are you really human? How could you not know the Crimson Hawk? Are they any good?" Yi Chong asked. Oh heavens, how can someone ask such a ridiculous question like that on this day and age? Gu Shaz looked like he could faint at any moment. His pallor was the perfect depiction of someone with severe anemia. Number 2 grudgingly managed an explanation. "The Crimson Hawk is a powerful crew of space pirates. I don't know if they are the strongest amongst the pirates, but they are undoubtedly the most notorious. Compared to other pirate crews, they are more ruthless. Those who are captured rarely escaped alive." Yi Chong cocked his head to one side and thought for a moment. "What you're saying is that they will surely invade this ship?" Number 2 nodded. "Definitely." Yi Chong stood abruptly, surprising the 2. Gu Shaz was flustered. "What are you up to? Don't do anything rash. They kill without so much so at the snap of a finger." Suddenly, Gu Shaz quieted in realization, remembering that this man was just the same. "I need mechs. Do you know where to find them?" Yi Chong asked nonchalantly. Number 2 felt that the man before him was truly an enigma. He was calm in the face of such impossible odds, and still high in spirits for the fight. Perhaps only the ignorant could be fearless. At the bottommost level is the cargo bay. Usually there would be a few backup mechs so that pilots whose damaged mechs could not be repaired in time can still resume combat. For a commercial fleet like this with many mech pilots on board, surely there would be a few of those backups. Number 2 may not feel that this struggle could have any effect, but in her heart there was still a ray of hope. If he succeeded, then the young master would be saved. "How do I get to the cargo bay?" Upon hearing that there were mechs available, Yi Chong's eye suddenly blazed brightly. The cargo bay's entrance was locked tight, and to open the door would require a passcode. There was no time to ask anyone for passcodes. Yi Chong took a deep breath, and in an instant, his chest expanded like a wind box, every muscle of his body began to burn like fire, as if he was inhaling hot air. Yi Chong bent his knees to a horse stance, angled his arm and closed his palm into a fist. He drew his arm slowly backwards while drawing and accumulating strength, bit by bit. He inhaled sharply, his body's temperature had risen to the point of being almost unbearable, and the bow was fully drawn. Thump. An extremely off-putting thud centered at Yi Chong's right fist as countless cracks densely formed towards the surrounding in a frenzied manner. The black entrance storage door soon cracked like a blooming flower of white silver tainted with crimson patches. Smash. A glass-shattering-like sound rang as the tiny bits of metallic flower withered petal by petal. Hush. Shush. The crack soon caused the door to have its pieces fall down in a heavy shower. Yi Chong glanced at his right hand, where an open wound bled with its flesh lacerated. He couldn't help but shudder upon the bloody mess. Apparently smashing a door open barehanded is highly dangerous. I should refrain doing that too much in the future. Without hesitation, Yi Chong stormed into the storage area. He then immediately found a series of mech warp switches neatly arranged on the rack by the wall. As if a famished wolf which bumped into a feast, he pounced in a hurry. Since these were mechs for backup, other than some of them being specialized scouting models, most of them happened to be mechs for use in outer space. Yi Chong thought for a moment and picked a scorpion-shaped mech model painted completely black, named the Sand Scorpio, which had outstanding speed and a wide scope of vision. The body was satisfactory and the color allowed it to perfectly hide and go unnoticed by enemies. Yi Chong didn't pick the Sand Scorpio merely because of these features, but there was something unique in the functions that caught his eyes. Staring at the rack, he grit his teeth. The warp switches clinked as he swept all of them into his fanny pack. He tumbled and hopped into the cabin of a Sand Scorpio. He looked at the interface with panic, as it required him to perform a first launch setup. He missed Mew. Mew was so much more convenient than this. He never was required to perform a complicated setup. It only took a drop of his blood to launch. His eyes glared at the popping messages on the hologram while his hands moved quicker than its shadows. There were a number of properties exclusive to the Sand Scorpio, and to utilize them well, Yi Chong had to go through the settings first. In the battlefield, what lies between life and death is only a matter of seconds. A slip could change things forever. He would not dare to proceed without any form of preparation. In a panic, he might have been in a rush, but he didn't rush. Instead, Yi Chong carefully and calmly went through the overall settings. Only if Mew was there, then his pathetic life would be saved. And he wouldn't have to be so agitated at the moment. Gu Shaz and number 2 sat quietly in the room, looking at each other. Meanwhile, in the battlefield, it was total chaos. Both sides had experienced pilots. Beams of laser in all kinds of colors diverged, converged, overlapped and collided into each other. The darkness of dead space was lustered by the sparks of war. The oak leaves were more like an actual army than a bunch of pilots. They raided in a planned formation. Disciplined, supportive, and orderly as they helped each other out. All for one, one for all. 10 advanced pilots formed the branches of the entire army, while Fid, the crew master, was the mastermind of it all. Man shall not be weak under his great reputation. The space pirates of the Red Owl Beard came in an overwhelming amount against the oak leaves, and everyone piloted a mech programmed for combat. They arrived like a pack of wolves, cunningly avoiding direct contact with the oak leaves, and began ruffling their wings and tail without holding back. They would never stay for long on the oak leaves, they would just hit and run. Judging by the situation, both parties couldn't do anything to each other at first. But as the Red Owl Beard easily outnumbered the oak leaves, the scale of war gradually tilted in favor of the space pirates. Yi Chong was piloting his Space Scorpio as he stealthily tailed behind a trading vessel. With much caution, he glanced at the chaotic situation before him. He might have seen much more brutality back at Trash Planet 12 in the past years he stayed there, yet the scene before him was still casting chills down his spine. Countless mechs swayed, glided and exploded from time to time. Yi Chong witnessed the mechs bursting into shots of fireworks, illuminating the dark space before him. Even though he had been into numerous matches at the NRS training ground and had smashed enough machines, none of those were overwhelming enough to compete with the epic scene at that moment. He tried to calm down the rustling in his thoughts. Stay alive, I must stay alive. Yi Chong mumbled repetitively, as he attempted hypnotizing himself to remind how he could not just die there. I had stayed on Trash Planet for long enough, and I had finally made my way out of there. I have not seen enough of the outside world. I can't die. He screamed to the top of his lungs. Puff, puff, he gasped boldly. Slowly he caught his breath and regained serenity. What to do now? At this rate, it would be only a matter of time when the oak leaves miserably lose. Even in self-content, Yi Chong knew his position well, as he might have assumed himself to be powerful and invincible, but he could barely turn over the place in such situation. He could not change what would happen in the end. As soon as he calmed down, he started to ponder. Considering how both parties were busy with each other, and no one had the grace to look over here, he had an idea. How about I just get onto one vessel and sneak away? I had just learned some tricks on this from Gu Shaz a while before, it shouldn't be a problem. Wait, no, he turned down the idea himself as he thought about the limited speed a vessel could offer. By the time the space pirates ended the fight in glory, he might be merely slightly ahead of them. There's no way for him to race with a pirate craft. He would be cornered in no time. How about escaping with one of the mechs I got? Guarantee they would not notice. Well, even if they had caught me red-handedly running away, they would send nobody to go after me. Even if they wouldn't send a flock of them. If that's the case, with only 1 or 2 of them, I still have a chance. But mechs aren't theoretically designed for long-term flights, as the energy gets depleted fast. It was insufficient to begin with, and there was no resupply. Yi Chong had neither water nor food for necessities. If he even managed to escape, he would be starved or derated to death in the boundless galaxy. Then what should I do? He was puzzled, knotting his brows. Suddenly, the corners of his eyes discerned a strangely crafted spaceship, and it was crowded by pirates. It seemed to be the head of all pirate crafts. By then, an idea automatically popped up in his mind and it began lingering in his mind ever since. As he shifted his sights upon a number of floating rocks a few meters away, his idea took shape. The battle was reaching its climax as both sides began to have major injuries. Almost everyone took part in the tipping point of the fight. This is it. He made up his mind and grit his teeth, with the thought of risking his life. Whether he would be dead or alive, it all depended on this. He sat up straight in the controlling seat, closed his eyes and took a specific rhythm to breathe. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Consciously adjusting his muscles into relaxation, his arms reached the control panel gently, with the fingers curving naturally. Right then, his eyes forced open, lustrously. Damn it. He cursed softly. His hands elusively moved. Right on the fence between death and life, he did not let up. He dared to promise, and that was the time where his hands moved the fastest they could ever be. Accelerate. Gear up. Within the spark of his eyes, he had hit the highest velocity as he drove towards the front of the vessel diagonally, as if the vessel was his nemesis. At 10 meters away from the vessel, completely immersed in the shadow of the gigantic craft, he was still speeding up with his hands, away from split seconds crashing. Sand Scorpio at maximum speed, launched the additional engines in a bombardment. The Sand Scorpio made a gorgeous curve as he glided it under the bottom of the vessel. There was barely 10 centimeters between the Scorpio and the vessel. Yi Chong focused on the hologram and repeated the calculation in his mind. His hands had hardly paused. Sweat hung on his forehead. It looked like it was rather consuming for Yi Chong to perform such input. The bottom of the vessel had a breadth about 50 meters long. At this speed, the Sand Scorpio would flee from the vessel within less than a second. In that second, when the Sand Scorpio glided through, the smooth dark body turned into dense and unorderly lumps all over. The long sting was also kept underneath. The Sand Scorpio by then appeared to be like a random space rock from nowhere. The engines were all shut down the moment the craft fled from beneath. Such a chain of complications done in one go within a second, Yi Chong could feel the amazing speed of his hands. That was the first time in his life appreciating Mu's inhumane marble training. The Sand Scorpio propelled like a shattered meteorite through the group of vessels in silence. No one in the battle noticed the existence of this meteorite. Camouflage and unique ability possessed by the Sand Scorpio. By making use of the uneven lumps on the surface, it hides itself from enemy detection pretending to be a piece of rock. But this ability is hard to utilize, as the activation of it has a harsh requirement where the user has to shut down the power first, while rebooting the system from utter inactivity to mobility would also require massive inputs. In other words, right when you use this ability, you have completely given up your mobility. You could only pray that you won't be detected by enemies. If you were, unfortunately, you'll be skewed. Unquestionably, the overwhelming requirement on the precision of piloting is one of the main reasons that prevented this technique to be commonly used. In the meantime, concealed in the shadows of the vessels, Yi Chong's Sand Scorpio crept by. If one were to take a closer look, one would notice how this piece of rock was always either traveling right beneath every vessel or sliding through by its side. There was merely a gap between each slide through. Oh, the risk. Every time when Yi Chong was moving by a vessel, he would utilize the cover of the shadows to perform a sequence of inputs involving the reboot of his engine, adjusting his aspect and coordinates, and turning off the engine again. As he passed by the last vessel, he finally could have a sigh of relief. The inertia of the Sand Scorpio glided it diagonally towards the floating rocks far away. In the middle of the silent and dark sky of the night, the gliding rock didn't get anybody's attention. It was then Yi Chong realized how truly soaked he was, as if he had just gotten out of water. His hands were in spasms, the aches were coming through. It seemed like the series of inputs just now had gone beyond the capacity in his usual training. The discomfort he had, it was from overusing his hands. His right hand was the worst as it was wounded by the punch breaking into the storage area. Under normal circumstances, the injury was nothing in his eyes, but considering it was an injury over another, he begged his right hand to not go haywire at the moment. Sweat blended with blood. The saltiness of the sweat scorched the right hand of his. A constant stimulation that kept his hand from feeling worn out. At this speed, it would take about 5 more minutes to get to the group of rocks there. The lights were turned off in the cabin, with the hologram illuminating Yi Chong. It blinked in a dreamy nature, an illusionary to behold. Yi Chong couldn't be bothered by the other kinds of beauty taking place in his cabin. He had more concern on the ongoing information in the hologram, as he adjusted his breathing pattern to slightly reduce consumption of stamina while his hands were gently fluttering to resolve their fatigue. How the situation of the battlefield had turned out, he would not dare see. 5 minutes passed. Yi Chong stared at the approaching rocks as he inched towards. A never-before-felt sensation of anticipation raided his mind. The very first step had been completed flawlessly. What's next? It's coming. Closer, closer, closer. Now. The Sand Scorpio got to the shades of the rock's end. Full force. Booming, the engine had been turned on and all supportive engines on the side wings engaged. The supportive engines took on different angles and directions from time to time while the Sand Scorpio, like it was attracted by the rocks, performed a 120-degree curve, sliding into one side of a rock and smoothly exiting out from another. The process was without interruption, executed intuitively. The rocks were distant from the battlefield, making them less noticeable, which was why Yi Chang chose the rocks in this area instead. And he would be using these rocks to complete his direction change. And without doubt, he did it well. He was sure that if Mew was there, Mew would be giving his rare compliments on his perfect curve as well. The Sand Scorpio had its engine switched off right after coming out from the rock cluster. The direction of its travel to the pirate craft. By then, no one had noticed this very piece of rock that would change the outcome of this war entirely as it flew towards the pirate ships. Seeing the pirate ship approaching, he was getting nervous. The approach was impeccably accurate. His Sand Scorpio had just traveled by the first outermost pirate craft. It was only a close shave, which gave Yi Chang cold sweat throughout his body. If anything was inaccurate in his prediction before, there's no turning back. There's no recalculating or readjusting the mech's angle. If he were to switch on the Sand Scorpio, even just one engine, the camouflage would be busted right away. And he could imagine how he would be bombarded into oblivion by the firearms of the battling armies on the spot. The Sand Scorpio justified his calculating ability. There had yet to be even a slight scratch with any pirate ship and the Sand Scorpio was steadily sliding towards the deep abdomen of the pirate craft. He soon arrived at his destination, a pirate craft of an outstanding design. He was sure that the craft was not an ordinary pirate ship. Between every other pirate cruise, this one would become his prey in no time. He felt an intensity he never felt before, which surged throughout his body like electricity and excited him till he shuddered. Yi Chang's red bleary eyes, the tiredness, the aches from his wound, the spasms on both his hands were long gone by then. He was injected with a new form of energy, charging him up so much that he had never felt being this good in condition. Different from being the maniac in his mind, his hands were still performing inputs tidily and not thrashing about. As the Sand Scorpio hovered underneath the vessel, the tail was sprung open. Clink. A gentle screech came from the alloy rope. The bottom of the Sand Scorpio was a giant trochal disc, which usually was kept conical. When the Sand Scorpio's tail sprang upon the bottom of the ship, it transformed into the circular trochal disc which had itself fixed tightly underneath the ship. The ever-sliding Sand Scorpio had eventually stopped itself. Yi Chang calmed down. Yi Chang couldn't help but to start checking out the bottom of the ship right before him. At the center of it, there was a circular lid dented in the bottom. Judging by that, the lid could be possibly opened from the inside of it. Any mech modeled for space traveling would have an escape suit for the pilot, which not only was able to provide oxygen supply up to 10 hours, but also had the ability to fly. Well, of course, the so-called flying was only of range brief enough for one to reach the nearest spacecraft in space. Yi Chang put on the escape suit and kept the dagger that Gushaz gifted him at his waist, the toolkit in hand. He scurried out of the cabin in a flip and did not immediately follow the alloy rope attached upwards, rather he hovered towards the abdomen of the Sand Scorpio and got to its weapon storage. He cautiously used the toolkit in his hand and removed the laser sword installed on the Sand Scorpio. Well, for cannons, those were too much, considering how these would expose him anytime. Alright, Yi Chang wouldn't want to bet his life on these. So he grabbed the 3-meter-long laser sword. It looked a bit absurd for a laser sword. He then clung onto the alloy rope and made his way up to the bottom of the pirate ship. He observed the embedded lid and confirmed it had to be opened from the inside. Too bad. By then he instantly dropped the idea of using the toolkit to open the lid. He put the toolkit aside and raised the laser sword with both hands. To die in space or to take another chance to another frontier. This shall be taken. Yi Chang impaled the laser sword in his hands right onto the lid without hesitation. Wondering what material this ship was built out of, Yi Chang was facing difficulty cutting through, even with a powerful laser sword. Droplets of sweat formed on his forehead, reflecting the glaring light coming from the laser sword. It was quite striking in the darkness of space. He would be in trouble if he didn't make it fast. People would notice him soon enough. The other hand of his was gripping the alloy rope attached to the trochal disc of Sand Scorpio to stay still in the weightlessness of space. He hoped that the suction would be strong enough to hold him up and not drop him out of a sudden. The laser sword was gradually making progress as it started to sink into the bottom of the ship. Man, this armor is sure thick. The sword's entire blade had already been engulfed by the ship's body, but there was yet a breakthrough. There was no other choice. Yi Chong had to dig a way in. He plucked out the armor piece by piece. This is tiring with a laser sword. It would be certainly lovely if I have a laser shovel or something instead. He didn't forget to crack a joke to lighten the atmosphere at that moment, just to relax his tightened nerves since he started to notice his muscles were stiffening due to nervousness. Back when he was at Trash Planet 12, whenever he was in such a dead or alive situation, cracking jokes was the method to bring him good luck. He starkly looked like the nanobot working in space stations. And they were used for slavery. Zing. The laser sword felt nimbler out of a sudden. Great. Yi Chong cheered. We finally got through. He carefully sliced an opening big enough to fit a man and kept the Sand Scorpio back in the alternate dimension, thanking it for its tremendous fulfillment in its role. He weaved into the pirate ship with much caution. Right as he was in the ship, he felt weight and staggered, nearly losing grasp of his sword. He just realized that he had already entered the gravitational field of the ship. Illuminated by the light of the laser sword, Yi Chong looked around attentively. At the main control room, Mr. One-Eye had a cigar in his mouth and cozily melted into the fluffy commander seat, with serenity in his eyes. His willowy strategist held hands with devotion as he stood behind his leader. These twerps sure know something. Mr. One-Eye chuckled, they knew how to fight. PSH, this rowdy fella was really fierce. Ha. It was not strange for him to be one of my arsenals. But the fat lamb run-in this time was a bit tough to deal with. Too bad he ran into us. Ha-hey-he. We're making some fortune this time. He coveted the gigantic vessels, with countless jewelries of gold and diamond that flew in his eyes. The slender strategist nodded obediently. He deeply understood the situation as his sunken face, usually pale, had been drunkenly red by then, obviously being overjoyed from hunting down this rare fat lamb. Such an unexpected loot. Coming out of nowhere. Surely even a menacing guy like him would be blinded by joy too. Though blinded by joy, he still remembered to butter up his master. This is all because of your superior leadership, Mr. One-Eye. The loot is more than enough for us to live like a king for the next few months. But, great leader, there has been rumors coming from the Black Cove, talking about how every item was strangely out of stock recently. We even have the word of the elderly there, saying they would pay handsomely for any stock sent. Not only handsomely in money but also handsomely in Black Cove points. Well, I have a suggestion, Mr. One-Eye. Are we sending these stocks on the vessel right to the elderly? So that we would not lose out much while earning these decent Black Cove points, which could be put into good use for us. Black Cove was sending chills down Mr. One-Eye's spine upon hearing it as he shuddered. The fear didn't last till the phrase Black Cove points was mentioned. His single eye lustered. Black Cove was a mysterious place, the absolute center of shadowy figures. It was also a paradise for consumerism, with the hottest chick, the smoothest wine, the brightest costume, the kindest service, the best mech, sexual, mellow, thoughtful, gorgeous and advanced, not anything of any adjective, as long as you could think of, you could own them all. Even those you couldn't think of would exist in Black Cove, like the beast you had not seen before. Literally everything that would be an eye-opener to you would be in Black Cove. Currencies of the 5 major galaxies were all usable in this area, but only for services in the outskirts. If you would want to contact and of course you would want to the darkest, the most mysterious, the deepest of Black Cove, namely the inner area, the core, you would need currency of an exclusive kind by Black Cove, the Black Cove points, which could not be obtained under normal circumstances like exchanging them with currency from the major galaxies, unless anyone in possession of the points was willing to exchange them for your galaxy bucks. In the market, those points were already sought after by desperate buyers with astronomical offers, yet no one in actual possession was happy enough to trade them off. To a space pirate like Mr. One-Eye, every single point was worth more than anything. Every once in a while, the elderly at Black Cove would announce a series of requests, in exchange for Black Cove points if any of those quests were accomplished accordingly. In addition, all the workers serving in the core of Black Cove would be paid points too as their salary or wages. The catch that turned people off was, be it a sincere request from the elderly or a job in the inner area, they were never easy to begin with. The requests from the elderly were of extremely difficult, where even a real extraordinary man of authority like Mr. One-Eye with an army of followers could only helplessly stare at such requests. If you managed to squeeze into the core of Black Cove to work, congratulations. That means your expertise is of brilliant mastery. As long as your standard is high enough, even though you are a problematic figure for instance, it would not hinder your admission to work in the core because your strength determines everything in the core. But well, there was still one more way to get Black Cove points. It was quite a strange way to provide precious information in exchange. There would be experts to rate your info and pay you with those points accordingly. Are you sure about the rumors, Willow? Mr. One-Eye quickly asked. Willow replied respectfully, yes sir, I heard it from Mr. Jackson. Along the way I also have discerned it from whispers of some of the people. Jackson. Mr. One-Eye muttered. He moaned as he thought. Jackson was one of a kind among the space pirates, different from the Red Owlbeard who came in crowds. He was the lone wolf hunting in space. He might be alone, but none of the crew dared to look down on him. Nobody ever was brave enough to steal his loot. Somehow, there was a reason, but it was unspeakable for everybody. They couldn't explain why they feared to steal his loot, it just happened, as if an unwritten rule among the crew. If it was from Jackson, chances are it is real. Mr. One-Eye exclaimed, but you know, it takes far to travel to the Black Cove. We the Red Owls carry in such a huge vessel, it is not strange there could be anybody in the way, wanting to steal our gold. But, sir, this is a golden opportunity to get your points. Strategist Willow advised, I think, this is a risk worthy to be taken. Also, even if there is anyone who is daring enough to stand in the way, we are not angels to spare gifts, especially under your supreme leadership. They would not simply offend you, Mr. One-Eye. If we all make it this time, those people in our way would be running away the next time they see us. Of course it all depends on your wisdom, great leader of the Red Owls. The great leader of the Red Owls made up his mind, right? You're right. How could I let go of a treasure chest like this? It is surely worthy of some risk. Those Black Cove points were what I dreamed of. We're just short of a few points to get us a new boat. Hehehe, imagine the world if I got a new craft to thrash with. Oh, how wise our leader. Willow praised along. Ha 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 ha. Mr. One-Eye patted his shoulder, don't worry. I'll share Yale some coins once I have the entire chest. Ha 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 ha. Willow's face blossomed with excitement, bowing and nodding his head in wholehearted loyalty. While they were so indulged in their glorious future and wealth, they never noticed a shadow that flashed by the hologram. Yi Chong waited right outside the door, silently like a huntsman's jaguar standing by in the dark corners. He was anticipating the moment for the prey to be immobile. As Yi Chong explored the pirate ship all the way, he encountered nobody. It was as if the whole craft was a fraud, a hollow shell filled with no one. That was his impression till he hit the main control room and his ears caught some mumbles. He stopped by and hid himself. He peeked into the control room. There were only two persons. Apparently the one with an eye patch at the side seemed to be the leader, judging by how his only eye blinked with charisma as he spoke to another who seemed to be in respect, a respect by fear. Yi Chong's fingers fiddled the dagger in his waist. The laser sword was too long to be carried around in a small space like this. Plus, the light it produced was too distinctive, it would alert the enemy in no time. As soon as he made his way into the craft, he dropped it somewhere in the darker corner of the corridor. He also discarded the spacesuit since that plump thing was too clumsy to walk with. Mr. One-Eye was giving commands through the interface projected before him, while Willow stood behind his supreme leader. Both of them were facing their backs to Yi Chong outside. He waited for the best time to strike. Mr. One-Eye muffled some considerable matters and disconnected the transmission, gasping in the end. That's the moment Yi Chong had been waiting for. Yi Chong tiptoed, his back slightly hunched, and sneaked to the back of Mr. One-Eye. The thick carpet over the floor of the control room was such an advantage to keep his movement silent. Mr. One-Eye, who had spent almost his whole life dancing between the brink of life and death, seemed to have his instinct surprisingly calling him to take a glance to his back as he sensed something. Damn. Yi Chong was agitated. He sprang up on his legs and pounced quickly, with the dagger in his right hand stinging like the venom of a snake. The process was fast, accurate and painful. As usual, he did not hold back. The next moment after that was him locking his dagger right onto Mr. One-Eye's neck. From his experience, he could guarantee that if this blow was landed right, his neck would have a huge cut. Mr. One-Eye could hear the wind whooshing from his back. Terrified, he couldn't be bothered of how graceless he would look. He lifted himself off the armrest and bounced off like a ball, rolling to the front as he dodged this very blow from Yi Chong. Of course, as past experience taught him well, right as he bounced off, he switched on the transmitter. Willow the strategist didn't seem to have reacted in time. He only saw how his supreme leader rolled on the carpet out of a sudden and was in deep confusion. What the heck is our leader doing? Yi Chong thought he would have landed the hit, but in fact he didn't. That was uncalled for. He couldn't help but flinch a little. Then his sight shifted upon the Willow guy frozen at the side. Intuitively, he launched his left fist upon his waist. Wham! Willow was sent flying like a ragged doll in a gorgeous curve right onto the wall as blood splashed and painted the plain white wall a mural of cherry blossoms. Mr. One-Eye, who witnessed the power of a mere punch being this devastating, had his face drained of color. Yi Chong was going to react. Beep. Yi Chong jumped at the interface suddenly popping out. The grunt in the screen was stupefied, wondering why his leader called him right after the transmission was ended. "What's your command, sir?" he asked. "Are you dumb or what?" Mr. One-Eye couldn't control and baffled. "I command your dumbass. Don't you have eyes or something? Don't you see I'm getting assaulted? How about you act fast and Cal?" He choked on his words and his rampaging temper was abruptly extinguished as he saw Yi Chong jumping onto him. He knew well in his mind, as long as he bought himself a little bit more time, his men would make it here. Just one more minute, no? Half a minute maybe. Comforting himself in his mind. He went dizzy for a brief moment while Yi Chong then had already hunted right in front of him. He was traveling like a phantom in the room, with the blade of his dagger glowing coldly as he brandished it, making orbits and orbits that flashed one after another. The afterimages further frightened the old pirate. His face paled further. He was not expecting a mere man having such strength would also possess such horrifying agility. His past reminded him of how he recognized the capability of immense speed more than immense strength. Immense strength could be threatening, but not as practical as immense speed. Speed, brutality and accuracy. It's always speed that mattered most. There had been a saying among the pirates, "Nothing shall avoid its defeat, unless speed it was." One could only have either. With great strength you let go of your dexterity and vice versa. However, if there would be an exception to this balance, one who possessed both immense strength and speed, that would be a big terror. Mr. One-Eye never thought of having such an encounter today, with such a powerful force. His hope sank over time. He reacted reflexively in the experience of a great man like himself. He knew he couldn't dodge, so, girding his teeth, he raised his arms and warded himself from the fatal blow. Spilt. Crack. It was the sound of the blade piercing the flesh at first, followed by the bone crushes. "Ah!" Mr. One-Eye shrieked. The pain penetrated right through his marrow, flooding his thoughts like a tsunami wave. He wanted to do something. He needed to something. How to do it? His subconscious urged him to do something, anything would do as long as the pain could be lessened. Yi Chong noticed the moment when Mr. One-Eye was shouting in pain, the opportunity when he loosened his guard. Clink. He pulled out his dagger from the flesh, blood poured out like fountain. His eyes locked on, with the dagger locked right onto the throat like a snake's fangs. It didn't miss this time. The one eye on his face bloated, like a dead fish he was, glared at Yi Chong as if he was in disbelief of what had happened to himself. One hand holding his throat, while his lips lifted, wanting to mutter some words but only fizzes rushed out like a broken pipe. The blood gargled out of his mouth next. It lasted for a few seconds before the old pirate collapsed into the annals of history. The grunt in the interface was shocked by the sight. His brain remained malfunctioned. He couldn't react and could only watch on. It was when he saw his leader collapse, he only reacted, in screams and shouts. Yi Chong glanced nonchalantly and shut down the transmitter. The next thing on the list, Yi Chong was aware of. One last thing to do. Run. He hopped onto the control seat and piloted the ship backwards. As this was the first hand-on experience to pilot an actual spacecraft for him, he acted rather awkwardly. There was quite a number of guarding crafts nearby and Yi Chong crashed into them occasionally as he made his way to escape. The crewmen on the ships outside did not know their leader's death. They just assumed it was one of the mischievous moments by their head. Moreover, such minute impact wouldn't harm their ships that much. So the crewmen just laughed on as they watched their leader entertaining them like a clown. It would be a precious moment to behold. Of seeing the leader acting like a joke. It didn't take long till Yi Chong got a hold of it. He realized it wasn't that much of a difference compared to piloting a mech. Back on the battlefield, Fid was pleading in agony. These pirates couldn't stop harassing. His team was running low on power for their mechs. But the constant harassment was preventing them to refill. It would only take about 2 to 3 more minutes before he and his team would be hunted like a pen of helpless lambs by a pack of wolves outside. He was almost depressed. Out of the blue, something occurred on the battlefield. Something strange. It began with one of the pirates stopping the attack, then the next and the others, as if an infection. In less than half a minute, almost the entire crew held their attacks. Fid, witnessing such a creepy sight before him, was puzzled. Was this another diabolical plan by the filthy owls? These crewmen did not need conspicuous tricks like these. Or had mercy got into their heads to let us all go? No way. Puffed. Barbarians like the pirates would be religious enough to spare the life of others. Then I must be a saint too. Fid ceased his thoughts. He saved his speculation and commanded his team to head back and refill immediately. He couldn't bear to lose this very chance. He evacuated the team and ran back for his life. He turned his head as he escaped, which the sight nearly widened his eyeballs. The enemies. They turned back and ran too. They even fled faster than our team. Out of shock, his craft almost crashed into a vessel, such an unwieldy act he did. It was still a scorching battlefield with bombardments and slaughters. The next second, it was nothing. He took a glimpse towards his back. Man. He was put into immense shock. His situation by then was like a honeycomb dripping fresh, concentrated honey, where the hornets tailed vigorously. The first ever time it was Yi Chang that felt an urge to stab the damn honeycombs 1,000 times whenever he saw it. Without much guessing, he accelerated to maximum speed and prayed to God that this piece of pirate mount had capacity great enough to sustain him throughout the run from being chased down. If the capacity wasn't good enough, he's going to get cornered and shredded into nothing. If only that would happen. Fortunately, the craft indeed outperformed the rest and sped away. Well, it seemed like even a good old pirate like Mr. One I feared death to, that he must make sure he manages to run away. Anyway, at least I was saved. Riding the gigantic craft, he ran through space. The pirates went after him and didn't seem to be giving up anytime soon. Some even hopped onto their mech and rode on the pirate ship instead. Fire at will. They launched attacks without any pause, with any kind of weapon they had, be it the typical heat ray gun, lux blaster, spreading beam shooter, or the advanced laser sniper rifle. They even have their own particle cannons. However, wonder if it was because the ship had undergone some sort of modification for it being the mount of the potent corsair. For some reason, when the bombardment struck, the body of the ship was hardly damaged. At most, only the sniper rifle could leave little pores on the surface. The new leader of the pirates was in regret by then. He was formerly a devoted crewman under Mr. One-Eye's leadership. It was an unwavering bond of friendship too between the captain and himself. Iron, or Mr. Iron, mourning over the captain's death, went after the murderer, yet he was in such a pile of regrets, for why the heck did he modify his leader's craft to be that overpowered in the first place, making the murderer literally invincible at that moment? Seeing how he was truly invincible from the shooting, Yi Chang was oh sure jolly. Later, the gap between the pirates and himself grew larger and larger. Obviously he was on the right ship. The speed was well ahead of them all. At least he secured himself. Alert disengaged for him. He gasped in relief and switched to autopilot mode before collapsing into the seat. Every part of his body was worn out, especially his hands aching like being pricked by needles. The soft commander seat cloaked him with slumber. He felt like catching Z's finally after being stressed for so long. He couldn't hold it any longer, the guards or whatever, and dipped into his dreams. It's been 6 hours since Yi Chang woke up. The smell of death wafted throughout the control room. The bloody mess was such an eyesore. Yi Chang knotted his brows as the coppery smell spiked his nostrils. He lifted the dead body of the good-for-nothing pirate whose glory had become history and simply dumped him into the garbage chute. As he walked back to his lovely seat, Strategist Willow somehow flinched right on the wall. Wait, aren't you dead yet? This frail guy is still alive. It can't be. He knew the strength of his iron fist well, even a bulky guy like Mr. One-Eye would crumble in one punch. It's no good. It doesn't seem like that kind of fist a weakling like that Willow guy could take. Some thoughts sprung in his mind. He began unbuttoning Strategist Willow's shirt and it was as guessed. He discovered a kind of cloth, light yellow and with countless dark threads crossing over each other. Yi Chang removed the clothing from the strategist and fiddled with it. Such strength. He pulled the clothing forcefully with his hands, yet there was no splitting or splatting, the sound in which he was expecting when clothes were torn. The clothing remained intact. Yi Chang was quite intrigued and changed into it straightaway. He tried punching his own chest and strange things happened. He only felt a moment of heat on his body and the pain felt much lesser than he imagined. It was then he realized the concept of how the shirt worked. It generally dispersed the damage received throughout the entire clothing, which in return reduced the fatality of attacks. This is a nice safety charm. He couldn't let go of it and carefully had it to be the innermost of his outfit. Of course he did mutter, of how marvelous it could be if it was an overall for starters. Then Willow faintly woke up and found out himself top naked and chilly. Don't you come here. Please. He was frightened. Spare my life, mister. Please spare me. Yi Chong was still directing his cold sight upon the trembling strategist. Willow gulped a few times, there was only horror on his face. It took him a moment to spit few words as he shrunk. Me, mister. I'm verge sore, sorry, but it is my first time with a guy, you know, please do it gently. Yi Chong couldn't hold the impact and slammed the ground as he fainted on the carpet with his mouth bubbling. Yi Chong slowly reached the dagger at his waist and Willow saw that. Please spare me, master. Please. Spare. Me. Even more terrified, he pleaded quickly, if master could spare this worthless life of mine, Willow is willing to follow master everywhere and show loyalty. Willow would take care of everything for master's everyday needs and is willing to die for master. He drew the dagger rather sluggishly and spoke slowly. Oh. Tell me a reason not to kill you. The Willow man was sweating hard but he didn't have time to wipe it off. I know well about the environment and its surrounding. Extremely well. If master could spare me, I can guarantee to escort you out of the filthy pirates' raids. Also I know well about the pirates around here too. I could take up simple chores like getting things ready for master or hitting the underlings. I can tell you that I'm good at them. Over time, as he lifted his lips and spoke, the anxiety faded away as he spoke smoother and smoother till it was really unstoppable. The speech caught Yi Chong's attention. The surrounding was truly foreign to him. If he were to stick his head out everywhere, he would be caught by the pirates in no time. Maybe it would be a good idea to keep a man like this Willow guy. The strategist was intelligent for sure. Discerning the changes in Yi Chong's expression, he rejoiced in his mind. It seems it's working. Yi Chong, who made up his mind, glanced at the Willow strategist. You are right with your words. Indeed, your pathetic life would linger. However, if you were to do something funny, specifically, anything that you shouldn't have done. Humphy, his wrist shook and the dagger in his hand was sent flying, like dark lightning. Zap. It rubbed through the dented cheeks of the strategist by a few millimeters, and embedded all the way into the wall right next. The whole blade. Strategist Willow felt the chillness on his cheeks, as well as his own doom. But he then realized he was still in one piece. He let off a sigh of relief. Right when he thought of resting his eyes, he caught sight of the shrill dagger as he turned his head, and the panic that was formerly swallowed went up to his throat again. Such frightening strength. Every wall in this ship was made out of high-density low-carbon materials, which even a heat ray gun could only leave a tiny hole on it. He never thought a mere man like his master could make such a strike. His new master was absolutely a terror. Till he heard about his master sparing him his life for real this time, he got to relax and bowed numerous times to express his faithfulness. He actually had his own plans. He knew, despite being the second upper figure in the Red Owl beard, he stayed on only because he had the trust of his old leader. Unlike the third upper man in the crew, Iron, who had way more charisma and trust of the entire lower crew. Currently Mr. One Eye was dead and without doubt the crewmen would crown Iron as their new leader automatically. He never had a good time with Iron. He had issues with him. The Red Owl beard had no longer a place for himself, and if he stayed, it was only a matter of time for his permanent doom. Thinking again, the new master before him didn't seem to be an easier one to handle either, especially right after Iron witnessed how cold his master's eyes could be, bloodthirsty like an animal. This would be the kind who goes murdering without thought. Wonder how much blood had stained his hands. Talk about the number of lives who died by his knife. But that was clearly a misunderstanding. Yes, he was right about Yi Chong murdering without thinking much. Nevertheless, talking about the number of lives who died by his knife, that was rather an accusation than a statement. Yi Chong grew up on a trash planet and his childhood was spent with mutated life forms lurking in the rubbish dumps. He had to struggle to survive. So to his eyes, men were no different than the mutated life forms. So killing a man to him was just like killing a mutated life form. Frowning, Yi Chong waved his hand and interrupted the strategist's sputtering obsession. He threatened, no more of this complimentary nonsense from now on. So Willow, tell me, what is your actual name? It would be by linen with respect, he answered sincerely. Like and subscribe.